It was early September when I decided to go camping alone for a weekend. I had been working long hours at my job and felt like I needed some time away from everything. The plan was simple: drive out to a remote forest area, set up my tent near a small stream, and just spend 2 nights in complete silence, away from people, cars, and noise. I picked a spot I'd never been to before, a stretch of land deep inside a state forest where the ranger map showed no designated campsites. I wanted isolation, and I got it. The drive out there took about 5 hours. The last 20 miles were just dirt roads, narrow and bumpy, cutting through thick woods. My car, an old SUV, handled it fine, but I could feel how far I was getting from civilization. The trees were huge and close together, and the sunlight barely made it through the branches. When I finally reached a clearing near a creek, I parked and shut off the engine. The silence hit immediately. No cars, no voices, just the faint sound of water moving over rocks and the occasional bird somewhere far off. I set up my tent about 30 feet from the water. The ground was soft, covered with pine needles, and it smelled like wet earth. I unpacked everything: sleeping bag, small stove, a cooler, a lantern, and a folding chair. Felt good to move around, to do something simple. The air was cold and fresh. I gathered some firewood and built a small campfire before dark. As the sun went down, the forest changed. The warm orange light faded, and everything took on a darker, heavier tone. The trees looked closer, thicker. The sound of the creek grew louder somehow, like it was the only living thing around. I ate some canned food, sat by the fire, and stared into it for a while. When it was fully dark, I turned off my lantern and just listened. The sounds of the forest at night are strange. There's this rhythm to it: crickets, frogs, something moving in the leaves once in a while. You tell yourself it's just small animals, and it probably is, but it still puts you on edge. I tried to sleep, but I woke up several times that night. The first time, I thought I heard heavy footsteps outside my tent. They weren't fast or panicked, just slow, deliberate steps in the dirt. I froze and waited, holding my breath. After a few seconds, the sound stopped. I tried to listen harder, but all I could hear was my heartbeat and the water nearby. Eventually, I convinced myself it might have been an animal, maybe a deer, and forced myself back to sleep. The second night, I decided to hike deeper into the woods before dark. I followed the creek upstream, hoping to find a small waterfall I'd seen on the map. The hike took longer than I thought, and by the time I found it, the light was fading. It wasn't much, just a short drop where water fell over mossy rocks, but it was peaceful. I stood there for a while, breathing in the cold air, and then I realized how quiet it had become. The forest noise that usually surrounds you, birds, insects, had gone completely silent. Felt like the woods were holding their breath. That kind of silence feels wrong. I felt a strange pressure in my chest, the kind you get when you suddenly feel watched. I turned around to head back, but for some reason, I felt the need to look behind me every few minutes. The path looked different on the way back. The light was lower, and every tree started to look the same. I had marked my way using some small ribbons tied to branches, but in the growing dark, I could barely see them. My flashlight beam cut through the air, showing the mist starting to form near the ground. By the time I got back to my campsite, it was full dark. The fire had gone out. I didn't remember letting it die completely, but maybe I had been gone longer than I thought. I lit it again and sat down to cook some food. That's when I noticed something strange. My folding chair had been moved. I always kept it facing the fire, but now it was turned toward the woods. It wasn't a small difference either. It was completely turned around, facing the trees. I stared at it for a long time. I knew I hadn't done that. Still, I told myself maybe I bumped it earlier without noticing. I forced myself to ignore it, though the back of my neck was tingling. Later that night, while I was lying in my sleeping bag, I woke up again to the sound of footsteps. This time, I was sure it wasn't an animal. The steps were too heavy and steady. They moved slowly around my tent, crunching twigs and brushing against the fabric as they passed. I stayed completely still, barely breathing. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. The steps stopped for a long time, then started again, this time farther away, heading toward the creek. When I finally got the courage to unzip my tent and look out, I saw nothing but darkness. The fire was almost out, just a few red coals left. The air was freezing. I threw some more wood on the fire and sat up the rest of the night, clutching my pocket knife. Every small sound made me jump. The next morning, the first thing I noticed were the footprints. Human footprints, not boots, bare feet. They were clear in the dirt between my tent and the water. The prints looked fresh, the edges still crisp. Whoever it was had walked close to where I slept. I followed the prints toward the creek, but they stopped abruptly near the rocks, as if whoever made them had stepped into the water and disappeared upstream. I felt a deep unease settle in my stomach. I packed up my tent halfway, then stopped. I didn't want to leave immediately because it would feel like running, and I didn't want to admit I was scared. But I was. That evening, I built a bigger fire, trying to keep it burning bright. The light helped, but I still felt the presence of something around me. Not supernatural, just human. Like someone was out there, hidden in the trees, watching me. The woods were too quiet again. Every once in a while, I thought I saw movement in the shadows just beyond the firelight. But when I looked directly at it, there was nothing. Around midnight, I heard something that made my blood go cold. The sound of a zipper. My tent zipper. I wasn't inside. I was sitting near the fire when it happened. I turned quickly, the flashlight in my hand shaking. The tent flap was moving slightly. I stood up and shined the light, but no one was there. I rushed over and looked inside. Everything was still there, but my sleeping bag was half unrolled, and the knife I kept near it was gone. That was it. I grabbed my keys, stuffed everything I could into the car, and left most of my gear behind. I didn't care. I just wanted out. I drove fast down that narrow dirt road, my headlights cutting through the black woods. Every shadow looked like a person standing on the side of the road. It took almost 40 minutes before I reached the main paved road. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. When I finally got home the next morning, I noticed something in the back seat. It was my knife, the same one that had gone missing. It was lying on the floor behind the driver's seat. There was dirt on the handle, like it had been dropped somewhere and picked up again. I don't know how it got there. I never stopped the car, and I locked the doors before leaving the campsite. For days afterward, I couldn't sleep properly. Every sound outside my house made me jump. I thought about those footprints, that tent zipper, and the silence that would fall before something happened. I told myself it was probably some drifter living out there, someone who came across my camp by chance. But sometimes I wonder if they had been there the whole time, watching from the trees even before I arrived, waiting until the second night to let me know I wasn't alone. I haven't gone camping alone since then. Even now, years later, when I pass by wooded areas or hear the sound of water running through a creek, I get that same pressure in my chest. The feeling that someone, somewhere, is standing just out of sight, watching. I went camping alone last summer in a national forest a few hours from home. I'd been wanting to get away from people for a few days, clear my mind, and just enjoy quiet. I had camped many times before, but never completely alone. I chose a spot that was far off the main trails, near a narrow river that cut through thick woods. I found it on a map. No official campsite, just a flat area near the water with a small slope that blocked wind. I figured it would be perfect. The day I left, the weather was perfect. The sky was clear, the air warm but not humid, and the road into the forest was empty. As soon as I turned off the paved road onto the dirt path, I felt that deep isolation that only happens in places far from everything. No phone signal, no sounds except tires crunching gravel and birds calling somewhere above the trees. The road was narrow, twisting through tall pines and oaks, and after driving for almost an hour, I found the spot I had marked on the map. It was exactly what I wanted. Hidden, quiet, surrounded by thick woods with a small space to park my car and set up camp. I unloaded my gear, pitched my tent, set up a fire pit, and placed my cooler under a tree. The river was only about 20 feet away, slow-moving and calm. I could see fish darting near the surface, flashes of silver in the dark water. The sun was low but still bright enough to see clearly. I gathered some fallen branches for the fire, made sure my tent stakes were deep in the ground, and cooked some food. The quiet was peaceful at first. I could hear the wind moving through the trees, the water running, and the occasional creak of branches. As it got darker, the air changed. The woods started to feel heavier, almost like the silence had weight. The bright orange sunlight faded quickly, and soon the trees were just black outlines against a deep blue sky. I sat by the fire, listening to it crackle. The smell of the smoke mixed with the smell of the river. Every small noise caught my attention. A twig snapping somewhere, something rustling in the brush. I told myself it was just animals. Out here, that was normal. When I finally crawled into my tent, it was completely dark except for the dim light of the fire outside. The fabric walls of the tent made every sound sharper. I could hear the fire popping, insects buzzing, and the slow, steady movement of water nearby. I fell asleep for a while but woke up around midnight to a strange sound. It was faint, almost like breathing, slow and steady, close to the tent but not right next to it. I held still and listened. After a few seconds, I realized it wasn't breathing. It was the sound of something brushing lightly against the outside of the tent. It was slow, like someone dragging a hand along the fabric. I froze. I waited, trying to hear if there were footsteps, but there weren't any. The sound stopped, and the only thing I could hear after that was my heartbeat. I didn't move. After about a minute, I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent just enough to look outside. The fire was mostly out, glowing faintly, but I didn't see anything. The woods were pitch black beyond the edge of camp. I stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling of the tent, waiting for another sound. Nothing happened after that, and I eventually drifted off again. The next morning, I got up early. The air was damp, and fog hung low over the river. I walked around the camp and noticed something strange right away. There were footprints in the dirt near the fire pit. Not boots, bare feet. They led from the trees to the side of my tent, circled around, and went back into the woods. My stomach sank. They weren't mine. I had been wearing hiking boots since I got there, and these were clearly made by someone barefoot. I followed them a few feet into the woods but stopped when they disappeared into the thick undergrowth. The ground was soft, and it looked like whoever it was had been standing there for a while, watching. I stood there for a minute, listening, but the forest was completely still. No birds, no movement, nothing. I went back to camp and checked my stuff. Nothing was missing. Everything was exactly how I left it except for the footprints. That somehow made it worse. The rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept glancing into the trees every few minutes, thinking I saw movement between the branches. I decided to stay close to camp and not wander far. By evening, the air had gotten colder, and the fog started to roll back in from the river. I rebuilt the fire bigger this time and made sure it would last through the night. I didn't want total darkness again. As night fell, I sat close to the fire, trying to read but finding it hard to focus. Every sound made me look up. The wind picked up, and I could hear branches creaking overhead. When I finally went to my tent, I made sure to keep my flashlight and knife right next to me. I left the fire burning low outside, enough to see a faint orange glow through the tent wall. Sometime during the night, I woke up again. Took me a second to realize why. There was a sound outside. It was different this time. Slow, steady footsteps in the dirt. Not close at first, but getting closer. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The steps stopped a few feet from my tent. I could hear breathing now, slow and calm, not like an animal. It was human. I didn't move. I just lay there, staring up at the tent roof, afraid to make a sound. The breathing continued for what felt like a full minute, then faded. The steps moved away, slow and steady, until they disappeared into the trees. I didn't sleep at all after that. As soon as the sky started to lighten, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The fire was cold. My legs were stiff from lying still all night. I walked around and saw more footprints, fresh ones. They led right up to the door of my tent this time. I felt a wave of panic hit me. Whoever it was had come back and stood right outside while I was inside, awake but too scared to move. I packed up as fast as I could. My hands were shaking the whole time. I didn't bother with breakfast. I threw everything into the back of my car, not even folding the tent properly. As I started to drive out, I glanced at the tree line. The fog was thick again, curling around the branches, and for a split second, I thought I saw something. A shape, just barely visible between two trees, standing still. I blinked, and it was gone. The drive out felt endless. Every mile of dirt road made me more anxious. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone walking behind me. I didn't stop until I reached the main road. When I finally got home that night, I left my gear in the car and just sat inside my house for hours, staring at nothing. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about those footprints, the calm breathing outside the tent, how close whoever it was had gotten. It wasn't a ghost or an animal, it was a person. Someone barefoot, walking through the woods at night, circling my camp and watching me sleep. I didn't know if they were living out there, hiding, or just passing through, but the thought of how quiet they had been terrified me more than anything else. I still camp sometimes, but never alone anymore. Every time I hear a twig snap in the dark, I think back to that trip, the footprints in the dirt, the slow breathing inches away from me, and the realization that out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by miles of trees, the scariest thing isn't what you can't explain. It's knowing someone was there the whole time, watching, waiting, and choosing not to be seen. I went camping alone last October in a quiet forest area about 5 hours from my town. I had done a few solo trips before, but this one was different because I wanted complete isolation. No marked campsites, no other people nearby, just silence. I had been feeling burned out from work and wanted to disconnect for a few days. I packed everything I needed: tent, sleeping bag, stove, water filter, food, flashlight, and a small hatchet, and drove out early in the morning. The first half of the drive was just highways and gas stations, but once I left the main road, the world changed completely. The asphalt turned into a narrow dirt path covered with fallen leaves. Trees grew close to the road, bending slightly inward so that they felt like a ceiling above the car. My GPS lost signal halfway through, and I had to rely on the printed map I brought with me. The air grew cooler as I got deeper into the woods, and the light filtered through branches in sharp lines. It felt untouched, quiet, and heavy, the kind of silence that almost hums in your ears. After almost an hour of rough driving, I found a clearing next to a small stream. It wasn't an official campsite, no signposts, no trails, but it was flat and open enough to pitch a tent. The ground was damp from recent rain, and the smell of wet dirt and pine was strong. I parked my car off to the side, unloaded my gear, and got to work setting up. The sun was still high, but it barely reached the forest floor. The place was surrounded by tall trees, and the stream made a steady trickling sound that never stopped. Once everything was set up, the tent, my small folding chair, and the fire pit I made from stones, I sat for a while and listened. I could hear insects, the slow flow of the water, and the occasional snap of a branch far away. There were no signs of anyone else. No voices, no cars, no distant campfires. It was exactly what I wanted, or at least that's what I thought. When the sun went down, the change was fast. One moment the forest was dim, and the next it was pitch black. The temperature dropped sharply. I lit a small fire, cooked some canned food, and ate while staring into the flames. The light from the fire reached only a few feet out before fading into total darkness. The trees beyond looked like walls. Every now and then, I'd hear a soft rustle from somewhere in the distance. Maybe an animal, maybe the wind, but each time I froze, waiting to hear it again. Later that night, after putting out the fire, I got into my tent and zipped it shut. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the thin fabric wall glowing faintly from the moonlight outside. The stream made a calm sound that should have been relaxing, but instead it kept me awake. I started noticing how every small sound stood out. Twigs snapping, leaves crunching, faint thuds. Felt like the forest was shifting around me. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke up suddenly, not sure what had pulled me out of sleep. My body was tense, my ears straining. Then I heard it, slow, steady footsteps in the dirt outside. Not close at first, but moving in my direction. They weren't animal steps. They were too heavy and too spaced apart. My heart started pounding. The steps got closer, then stopped. The silence after was worse than the noise. I didn't move. I just lay there, eyes wide, barely breathing. After a minute or so, the steps started again, circling the tent slowly. I could hear leaves crunching underfoot, a faint brushing sound against the tent wall. Whoever it was moved quietly but not carefully enough to hide that they were there. I gripped my flashlight, waiting for something else. A voice, another sound, but nothing came. The footsteps faded away into the trees. I stayed awake the rest of the night, listening, waiting for them to come back. They didn't. When the sky finally started to lighten, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The air was cold and damp. The first thing I did was check the ground. There were footprints, faint but visible, leading from the tree-line to the tent and then looping back toward the woods.
Bare footprints.
Human. The sight of them hit me hard. The edges were soft, like they'd been made a few hours earlier. Whoever had been out there wasn't wearing shoes. I felt sick thinking about it. There was no reason for anyone to be out there barefoot, walking around someone's camp in the dark. I tried to convince myself it could have been a hiker, maybe someone lost, but it didn't make sense. The area was miles from the nearest trail. I didn't pack up immediately. I told myself I wouldn't overreact. I stayed close to camp that day, never wandering far from my car. Every time the wind shifted, I looked toward the trees, half expecting to see someone standing there. By afternoon, I realized how quiet everything had become. No birds, no insects, just the faint sound of the stream. The silence made me uneasy. That night, I built a larger fire and kept it burning bright. The light helped, but I still felt watched. Couldn't shake it. The shadows beyond the fire looked alive, like something was just past the light, standing still. I forced myself to stay awake as long as I could, but eventually my eyes grew heavy. I must have dozed off sitting near the fire because when I opened my eyes again, the flames had burned down low and the woods were completely black. I stood up and threw more wood onto the fire. As the flames caught, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My backpack, which I had left inside my tent, was now sitting near the edge of the clearing, about 10 feet away. I hadn't moved it. I walked slowly toward it and saw that it was unzipped. My food packs were scattered, and the small knife I kept inside was missing. I backed up, shining my flashlight around. The beam caught nothing but trees. No movement, no eyes reflecting back. I packed everything into my car right then. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I wanted to be gone. I threw my gear into the back seat, slammed the door, and started the engine. As I was backing out of the clearing, my headlights caught something for just a second. A shape between two trees, about 20 yards away. It looked like a person, tall and still. I didn't look twice. I hit the gas and drove as fast as the road allowed. My heart was racing the entire time. It took almost an hour to reach the paved road. I didn't stop once, not even to check behind me. When I finally reached the main highway, I felt the first real relief, like I'd escaped something. I didn't stop driving until I was home. When I unpacked the car later that morning, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My missing knife, the one from the backpack, was on the back seat floor, near the door. I had no memory of putting it there. It was dirty, the handle covered in dried mud. I just stared at it for a long time, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't left my car unlocked, and I hadn't stopped anywhere. For days after that, I couldn't sleep properly. Every creak in the house, every sound outside, made me jump. I thought about the footprints, the missing knife, the backpack moved outside my tent. Whoever that was out there, they were close enough to touch the tent while I slept. Close enough to unzip it, to move things without waking me up. I didn't tell anyone about what happened because I knew how it would sound. No one would believe it. But since then, I've stopped camping alone. I still think about that night every time I see a forest or hear running water. The woods used to make me feel calm. Now they just remind me that sometimes the most terrifying thing out there isn't what you can't explain, but what you can. Someone had been watching me that night. Someone who waited until I was asleep to move closer. Someone who knew exactly how quiet they needed to be. It was late August when I decided to take a short solo camping trip into the mountains. I'd been dealing with stress from work, endless noise from the city, and I just wanted quiet. I wanted to clear my head. I had done plenty of solo camping trips before, so it didn't seem like a big deal. I packed light but enough to last 3 nights: a tent, sleeping bag, small stove, food, a knife, and a few essentials. I found a spot on a topographic map that looked perfect, tucked between a small lake and a dense patch of pines, miles away from any official trail. The drive took me most of the day. The last stretch was rough, a dirt road that wound deep into the forest, the kind that looks like it hasn't been maintained in years. I had to drive slow to avoid the rocks jutting out of the ground. The trees got thicker, the air cooler, and by the time I finally reached a clearing near the lake, it was late afternoon. I turned off the engine and just sat there for a minute. The silence was almost unnatural at first. No traffic, no human sounds. Just water gently hitting the shore and the faint rustle of wind moving through tall grass. I set up camp about 50 feet from the water. The ground was soft with pine needles and sand. The lake was small, almost circular, surrounded by trees so thick that sunlight only touched the surface in certain spots. It looked calm, untouched. I remember thinking it was perfect, isolated, quiet, peaceful. I pitched my tent, gathered some dry branches for a fire, and cooked myself some noodles on the stove. The quiet was so complete that the sound of the water boiling seemed loud. When the sun started to dip, the forest began to change. The golden light through the trees turned gray, and then it was just dark. Fast. I underestimated how quickly night would fall up there. I got a fire going and sat next to it, just staring into the flames. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath. Every sound around me seemed sharper in the dark. The crack of a twig, the ripple of water, the occasional splash that I assumed was a fish. I remember how empty the place felt. I hadn't seen a single person since leaving the main road. I slept uneasily that night. I woke up several times because of noises. The first was something moving near the tent, slow and steady. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or deer. Then there was a sound like a soft thump, followed by a faint dragging noise. It wasn't close, but it was strange enough to keep me awake. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I fell asleep again. The next morning, I noticed something odd. About 20 yards from my tent, near the tree line, the ground looked disturbed, like something had been dragged through the dirt. It wasn't a deep mark, just a faint trail leading toward the woods. I followed it a bit but stopped after a few feet. It disappeared into the grass and pine needles. I told myself maybe it was just some animal digging for roots or pulling something it caught. That day, I spent some time exploring around the lake. The air smelled like wet wood and earth, and I could hear insects buzzing near the shore. I didn't go too far into the woods. I didn't have a compass with me, and I didn't want to risk getting turned around. When I got back to camp later in the afternoon, I found something that made me stop cold. My backpack, which I'd left zipped inside the tent, was sitting outside near the fire pit. The zipper was halfway open, and some of my food packs were gone. I stood there for a long time trying to make sense of it. There were no claw marks or teeth marks on the pack, so I doubted it was an animal. It looked like someone had unzipped it carefully. That thought put a knot in my stomach. The idea that someone might be out there watching me, waiting until I left my camp. It didn't sit right. I built a larger fire that night, mostly for light. The forest felt different after that. Heavier. Every sound made me turn my head. I noticed that after dark, the woods went completely silent. No insects, no frogs, nothing. Just the faint lapping of water. That silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like something was holding its breath. Around midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving between the trees behind my tent. Not close enough to see, but close enough that I could tell they were human. I stayed completely still. The steps would pause, then start again, circling a little. Then I heard a quiet splash, like someone stepping into the lake. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the water, but the beam just lit up mist above the surface. There was nothing there. I barely slept that night. Every time I started to drift off, I heard small noises. A branch snapping, soft crunching in the dirt, something brushing against the side of the tent. When daylight came, I felt sick with exhaustion. That morning, I decided I'd had enough. I started packing up. I didn't even eat breakfast, I just wanted to leave. That's when I noticed something else. About 10 yards behind my tent, in the dirt, there were footprints. Bare feet. Clear prints, not animal tracks. They circled the tent once, then led off toward the trees. The ground was damp, and the prints looked fresh. I froze. My chest tightened, and I felt that same sick pressure in my gut. Someone had been right there, walking barefoot around my camp while I slept. I felt exposed, like I had been watched all night. I packed as fast as I could, throwing things into the car without care. Before I got in, I looked once more toward the treeline. Everything was still, too still. The drive back down the dirt road was tense. Every bend in the road made me feel like I'd see someone standing there. I didn't, but the feeling stayed until I reached the paved road hours later. That night, back at home, I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints. The dragging mark near the woods. The backpack moved outside. I thought about how quiet the forest had been and how the noises always came from behind my tent, never from the same direction twice. It felt like someone was testing how close they could get without being seen. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me, and I looked up the area online. I found a small forum where people shared camping spots. Someone had posted about that same lake, said they'd gone there years ago and heard strange noises at night. They described seeing bare footprints near their camp too. The thread ended with a note that made my blood run cold. A local hunter had once found an abandoned tent deep in those woods with everything still inside. Food, gear, clothes, but no sign of the camper. Just a few bare footprints leading toward the water and stopping at the edge. After reading that, I deleted all my photos from the trip. I didn't want to remember that place. I still don't know who or what was out there. Maybe it was someone living off the grid. Maybe someone who didn't want to be found. I'll never know. But I know this. I'll never camp alone again. Even now, when I hear water moving at night or see mist over a lake, my chest tightens. I think about that silence, those footprints circling my tent, and the sound of slow steps fading into the woods. I can still picture how the firelight hit the edge of the trees, how something could have been standing there the entire time, watching, waiting for me to fall asleep. I went camping alone in late October, just before the real cold started. I wanted peace. No people, no traffic, no noise, just trees and air that smelled like dirt and pine. I picked a small, lesser-known spot near a lake about an hour off the main road. It wasn't an official campsite, more like a clearing people occasionally used. I'd seen pictures of it on a hiking forum. Quiet, remote, surrounded by thick forest. That was exactly what I wanted. I packed light but carefully. Tent, sleeping bag, small stove, hatchet, knife, some dried food, a flashlight, and a small first aid kit. My car was old but steady, and the back roads leading there were rough, filled with potholes and overgrown brush that scraped the sides of the vehicle. The further I went, the fewer signs of people I saw. No cabins, no hikers, no tire tracks. When I finally reached the clearing, it felt like stepping into another world. The air was cold and damp. The lake sat still at the edge of the trees, like glass, dark and silent. The only sounds were wind brushing through branches and the occasional ripple in the water. I set up my tent a little farther from the lake, near a patch of flat ground. The soil was soft under my boots, covered in fallen pine needles. It was quiet in a way that almost felt too quiet, like the air was heavy. I started a small fire before sunset and boiled some noodles on the stove. The heat from the fire felt good against the chill that started creeping in as the sky dimmed. I remember watching the trees, how they swayed just enough to make the shadows move. As night came, the air got even colder. I pulled my jacket tight and sat there for a while, just watching the fire. The lake reflected faint silver light from the moon, but it still looked like it went on forever into darkness. When I finally crawled into my tent, I was tired but restless. The forest was alive with sounds. Faint rustling, creaking branches, a distant splash from the lake. I tried not to think about it too much and eventually fell asleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of something heavy moving outside. At first, I thought it was an animal, a deer maybe, or a raccoon. The steps were slow and uneven, crunching the dry needles underfoot. But after a moment, they stopped. Total silence. Then, I heard the sound of breathing, faint but steady. Not animal-like, human. My heart started racing. I didn't move. I just lay there, staring into the dark fabric of the tent. The breathing was close, maybe 10 feet away. I could hear the air drawing in and out, slow and deliberate. Then, the sound of a foot dragging, dirt shifting, the faint scrape of something against metal. My cooler, maybe. It lasted a few seconds and then stopped. I waited, frozen, for what felt like forever. Eventually, I didn't hear anything else. I stayed awake until dawn, barely blinking. When morning came, everything looked normal, almost too normal. The fire pit was cold. The cooler was still where I left it, and nothing seemed disturbed. But when I walked around, I noticed something in the soft dirt by the edge of the trees. A footprint.
Bare.
No shoe tread, no pattern. Just toes, heel, and arch pressed into the ground. I stared at it for a long time, trying to come up with a reason for it to be there. Maybe some hiker walking barefoot, I thought. But it was cold, wet, and remote. Nobody would wander around barefoot this far from a road. The rest of that day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I told myself I was just spooking myself out. I kept busy, gathering more wood, cleaning up my camp, sitting near the lake for a while. The reflection of the forest on the water looked almost too still, like the world had stopped moving. When the sun went down, I built another fire. The warmth helped, but I still felt uneasy. The woods were too quiet. Usually, there'd be insects or the occasional bird, but it was like everything had gone silent at once. I sat there, poking the fire, trying to ignore it. But after a while, I noticed something strange. My hatchet wasn't where I left it. I'd stuck it into a log earlier, right next to my tent. Now it was lying flat on the dirt a few feet away. I didn't remember moving it. I felt my stomach tighten. I picked it up and kept it beside me as I sat by the fire, my eyes scanning the darkness between the trees. Every flicker of movement, every shifting shadow made me flinch. It was late, probably around midnight, when I heard it again. This time, the sound came from behind the tent, closer than before. Slow, careful steps, like someone trying not to make noise. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I gripped the hatchet so tight my hand hurt. The steps moved around the tent, circling it. I could hear the faint crunch of dirt and leaves, the sound of something brushing against the nylon wall. Then silence. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I could hear my heartbeat, loud and uneven. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, just barely, I heard the zipper of my tent move. Not opening, but sliding, like someone touched it gently. That broke me. I sat up, grabbed my flashlight, and yanked the zipper open in one motion, shining the light out into the dark. Nothing, just trees, the faint glow of the fire behind me, and cold air rushing in. I stood there for a long time, shining the light across the ground, the lake, the trees. Nothing moved, no sound, no one. I stayed up the rest of the night, sitting with my back against the tree, hatchet in one hand, flashlight in the other. The woods felt like they were closing in, the air thick and still. I didn't sleep at all. When the sun finally came up, the relief I felt was overwhelming. I packed fast, faster than I ever have. As I folded up my tent, I saw more footprints in the dirt, several of them, bare, scattered around the campsite, circling it like someone had been walking laps around me while I slept. I loaded everything into my car and drove out as fast as I could, bouncing over the rough road, glancing into the rearview mirror every few seconds. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, the trees crowding closer until I finally hit pavement again. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station nearly an hour away. When I stepped out, my legs were shaking. I walked around to check the back of my car, just to make sure nothing had come loose. That's when I noticed it, A single wet footprint on the back bumper. Barefoot. Small. Like someone had been standing there while I drove. I stood there staring at it, feeling everything in me go cold. It wasn't possible. I hadn't stopped. I hadn't seen anyone. The roads had been empty. I wiped it off, got back in the car, and didn't look back. When I got home, I unpacked everything and checked each bag. Nothing missing, nothing added. But that night, when I tried to sleep, I couldn't stop hearing that slow breathing in my head. Quiet, steady, human. I kept picturing those prints circling my tent, that faint sound of the zipper moving, the feeling that someone was standing just inches from where I slept. It's been months since that trip, but I haven't gone camping again. I can't. Every time I think about being in a tent, surrounded by trees, I remember that night, that silence, that breathing, those bare footprints in the cold dirt. I tell myself it was just some drifter, maybe someone living out there, curious or messed up. But deep down, what really gets me is the thought that they could have come inside the tent if they wanted to. They didn't take anything, didn't hurt me. They just watched. They wanted me to know they were there. And that's worse than anything else. Knowing someone was that close to me, that quiet, and chose to stay unseen. I went camping alone last summer in a remote part of the Cascade Mountains. I had been planning the trip for weeks. Just a quiet weekend away from everything. No people, no phone, no work. I picked a place that wasn't even on the official maps. Just a clearing beside a narrow stream that I found on an old hiking forum. The person who posted about it said it was peaceful, empty, and far from the usual campgrounds. That was exactly what I wanted. The drive there took nearly 6 hours. The last 2 were on a rough dirt road with branches scraping against the sides of my car and potholes that rattled everything I owned. The forest grew thicker and darker the deeper I went. There were moments where the trees formed a tunnel overhead and I couldn't see the sky. When I finally reached the clearing, the ground was soft, covered in moss and pine needles, and the stream ran quietly just a few yards away. It looked untouched, like nobody had been there in years. I set up my tent on a patch of dry ground, staked it down tight, and stacked some rocks around the fire pit someone had built long ago. The place smelled like damp wood and cold water. It was so quiet that even the sound of the stream felt loud. I made a small fire, heated up a can of chili, and sat by the flames as the light faded. The forest around me seemed endless, dark trunks fading into blackness in every direction. By the time I went to sleep, the fire was dying out. I zipped myself into the tent and listened to the sounds outside. The wind moved softly through the branches, and somewhere far off, I could hear a single owl. Everything else was still. I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound. It was faint but sharp, like the snap of a stick. My eyes opened instantly. I lay there listening. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by the crunch of dirt under a foot. My heart started pounding. I froze, barely breathing, staring at the roof of the tent. It sounded like someone was walking slowly around the edge of my camp. One step, pause, another step. The fire was out, so it was completely dark outside. I could only hear. The steps moved behind the tent, and for a moment, they stopped altogether. Then I heard breathing, faint, steady human breathing. Not the quick sniffs of an animal, not the heavy exhale of a bear. This was slow and controlled. I stayed still for at least an hour, listening. At some point, the sound faded away into the distance. I waited longer just to be sure before I finally drifted back to sleep, though it was shallow and uneasy. When I got up in the morning, the first thing I noticed was how cold it was. The sun hadn't fully broken through the trees yet. I stepped outside the tent, and that's when I saw them, footprints. Barefoot prints in the damp dirt around the fire pit and near my tent. They were smaller than mine, maybe a man's size 8 or 9, and they were fresh. You could see the toes clearly pressed into the mud. I looked around, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. The forest looked calm, like it hadn't changed at all. I tried to tell myself it was probably some hiker passing through, though that didn't make sense. I hadn't seen a single car or person since leaving the main road. The rest of the day, I stayed close to camp. I didn't feel comfortable wandering too far. Every small sound made me look up. Every rustle in the trees made my stomach tighten. I kept the fire going all day, even though I didn't need it. The smoke made me feel a little safer, like it was keeping something away. By evening, the tension was eating at me. I told myself I'd leave in the morning. I didn't want to drive those dirt roads in the dark, so I decided one more night wouldn't hurt. I ate a small meal and sat close to the fire, listening to the steady hum of the stream. The air felt heavier than the night before. No wind, no birds, no sounds at all except the crackle of the fire. When the sun disappeared, the forest turned pitch black almost instantly. The only light came from the flames and my small lantern. I sat there for a long time, just staring into the dark, unable to relax. Then, sometime after midnight, I heard it again, the same slow footsteps. They came from the same direction as before, from the woods behind my tent. This time, they were quieter, like whoever it was trying to move more carefully. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck rise. I turned off the lantern so I wouldn't be an easy target to see. The only light now came from the fading fire, which flickered weakly against the trees. The steps stopped again, right near the edge of the light. I squinted but couldn't see anything clearly. The shadows moved when the flames crackled, playing tricks on my eyes. Then, I heard something scrape metal on metal. My cooler. Someone had touched it. My chest tightened. I reached for the hatchet lying beside my chair, gripping the handle until my hand hurt. The noise stopped. The forest went dead silent again. I sat there for at least an hour, not daring to move, staring into the darkness, waiting for something, anything to happen. Nothing did. Eventually, I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. I went into the tent but didn't zip it fully closed. I kept the hatchet beside me, hand resting on it. When I woke up, it was early morning, gray light spilling through the tent fabric. I unzipped it and looked outside. The fire pit was cold, and my cooler had been dragged about 2 feet from where I left it. The lid was still closed, but there were muddy fingerprints on it. They were smudged, but clearly human. That was it for me. I packed everything as fast as I could. My hands shook the entire time. I didn't even bother cleaning up the site, just threw everything into the car. Before I got in, I walked toward the tree line just to look. About 20 feet into the woods, I found something strange. A torn piece of cloth, like a sleeve, caught on a branch. It was dirty, stiff, and looked like it had been ripped off something a long time ago. There were no trails around, no paths, nothing that suggested anyone should even be out there. As I drove away, the road twisted through miles of trees. Every time I checked the rearview mirror, I half expected to see someone standing there, watching. I didn't stop until I reached a small gas station nearly 2 hours later. When I stepped out, I finally felt like I could breathe again. That night, back home, I dumped my gear in the garage and took a long shower, trying to get the smell of smoke and dirt off me. When I came back out, I noticed something on the passenger seat of my car. A single muddy handprint on the outside of the window, smudged, small, and unmistakably human. It hadn't been there when I got in the car that morning. I'd been driving fast, not stopping once. I tried to come up with an explanation. Maybe I brushed against something, maybe it was my own by accident. But the size was too small and it was on the outside near the handle. For days after that, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside my window made me flinch. I kept replaying the noises from that night, the footsteps circling my tent, the breathing, the sound of my cooler being touched. Whoever was out there didn't take anything. They didn't try to hurt me. They just wanted me to know they were there. The more I think about it, the more I believe it wasn't random. That clearing was too far from any trail, too hidden. It felt like someone lived out there. Someone who didn't want to be found. Someone who watched anyone who came too close. I haven't gone camping since. I still have all my gear, sitting untouched in the garage. Every time I see it, I think about those muddy prints, that quiet breathing outside the tent, and the feeling that someone was standing just a few feet away from me all night, watching me sleep, waiting for me to wake up. And what scares me most now is knowing that if I hadn't left when I did, if I'd stayed just one more night, I might have found out exactly what they were waiting for. I went camping alone last May in the mountains of northern Idaho. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. Just me, a tent, and 2 days away from everything. I'd been stressed from work, barely sleeping, and I wanted to disappear somewhere with no noise, no people, no signal. I picked a remote spot I'd found on an old map, near an abandoned fire road that hadn't been used in years. I liked the idea of being somewhere nobody else went anymore. The drive took most of the morning. The road turned from cracked pavement to gravel and then finally to dirt, winding deep into the forest. The trees were thick, tall pines that crowded the sides of the trail until it felt like the world had closed in around me. Every mile made me feel more alone, but in a good way at first. I rolled down the windows and smelled the damp earth and pine sap. I remember thinking how good it felt to breathe clean air again. When I finally reached the clearing, it looked perfect. The ground was flat and covered in dry pine needles. A narrow creek ran a few yards away, slow and quiet, and the sunlight broke through the trees just enough to warm the area. It felt untouched, like nobody had set foot there in years. I parked beside a fallen log, unpacked my tent, and started setting up. By the time I finished, it was late afternoon. I built a small fire ring out of stones, unpacked my gear, and walked down to the creek. The water was icy cold, but clear enough that I could see every pebble on the bottom. The forest was completely silent except for the soft sound of water and the occasional creak of trees swaying in the breeze. It was the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring after a while. As the sun dipped lower, the shadows stretched across the ground. The air cooled fast, the smell of pine got stronger, and I started the fire. I cooked a simple meal, ate while sitting on a log, and watched the flames flicker. Everything felt still. I didn't see any animals, not even birds, just trees that seemed to go on forever. When I went to sleep, it was completely dark outside. The fire had burned down to glowing coals. The sound of the creek was steady, like white noise. I remember feeling peaceful, right before I woke up again, sometime deep in the night, to the sound of something crunching outside my tent. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer, maybe a raccoon. The sound was slow, deliberate, leaves and dirt shifting under footsteps. Then I realized the steps were heavy, too heavy for an animal that small. They came from the direction of the trees, moving closer, one at a time. My whole body went stiff. I didn't breathe. The sound stopped right outside the tent. For a long time, there was only silence. Then I heard something faint, a slow, steady breathing, not like a bear or an animal sniffing. This was human, controlled, quiet, like someone trying not to be noticed. I lay there completely still, my heart pounding so hard I thought whoever was out there could hear it. The breathing lasted maybe half a minute, then faded. The footsteps moved away, slow at first, then quieter, until I couldn't hear them at all. I stayed awake the rest of the night, staring at the tent's ceiling, gripping the small hatchet I kept beside me. Every sound from the forest made me tense up. I waited for the footsteps to return, but they didn't. When the sky finally started to lighten, I unzipped the tent carefully and looked outside. The forest looked the same as before, calm, still, ordinary. But when I walked around the site, I saw them. Footprints. Bare footprints pressed into the dirt around my tent. The ground was soft, and the prints were clear, human, no shoes smaller than mine. They circled halfway around the tent, stopping just beside where my head had been. My stomach sank. I walked farther out, checking the edge of the trees. The footprints trailed off into the forest, fading as the ground got harder. I looked as far as I could see, but there was nothing. No person, no animal, no movement at all. The woods were dead quiet. I tried to tell myself it could have been some local, maybe a hiker who got lost. But why barefoot? And why come that close to a stranger's tent at night? All day, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. The trees felt different, heavier somehow. I couldn't enjoy anything. Not the water, not the quiet, not even the fire when I made it again that night. I felt exposed, like something was just out of sight, waiting. That night, I couldn't relax. I sat beside the fire longer than I should have, staring into the dark beyond the light. The fire popped now and then, and every sound made me flinch. Eventually, I went into the tent, but I left my flashlight on and the hatchet beside me. I didn't even zip the bag up all the way. I wanted to be ready if I had to move fast. It must have been close to midnight when I heard it again. The same slow crunch of footsteps in the dirt. Closer this time. I held my breath, waiting. The sound stopped right beside the tent again. So close I could hear breathing. Slow, calm. It stayed there for what felt like forever. Then I heard the faintest sound, the zipper on my tent moving just a little, like someone had touched it. Not opening it, just dragging their finger along it. My stomach turned to ice. I stayed completely still. My hand tightened around the hatchet. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The breathing stopped. Then, silence again. I waited, frozen, for what felt like hours before I dared to look outside. When I finally did, the fire had gone out completely, and the campsite was swallowed in blackness. There was nothing there. No movement, no sound. But I didn't sleep again that night. The first light, I packed everything as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the tent poles twice. I kept glancing at the trees, expecting to see someone standing there. I threw everything into the back of my car and didn't even stop to check if I left anything behind. I just drove. The dirt road out felt twice as long as when I came in. Every turn, every shadow made me tense. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see someone following me. It took over an hour to reach the main road again. When I finally got there, I pulled over just to breathe. That's when I noticed something on the back window of my car. A handprint, small, faint, and muddy. It wasn't there before. It wasn't on the door handle where you'd grab if you opened it. It was on the glass, near the bottom corner, like someone had rested their hand there for balance. I wiped it off and got back in, trying to convince myself it must have been from when I was packing, even though I knew it wasn't. I hadn't touched that part of the window. When I got home that night, I unpacked everything and checked it all over. Nothing was missing, but my sleeping bag had small specks of mud on the outside, near the zipper, the same kind of mud that had been around the footprints. I hadn't noticed it that morning. I sat there for a long time staring at it, trying to make sense of it. Whoever had been out there, whoever had circled my tent, touched the zipper, left those prints, they hadn't tried to hurt me. They could have if they wanted to. They'd been right there, inches from me while I slept. But they didn't. They just watched. That's what gets me now. Not knowing who it was or what they wanted. The idea that maybe they lived out there in those woods miles from anyone. Maybe they'd seen me drive in and decided to come closer after dark. Maybe they do it to anyone who camps there, just walk the perimeter, listening, waiting. It's been months since then, and I haven't gone camping again. I still have all my gear, sitting untouched in the corner of my garage. Every time I think about going back, I remember that breathing, that slow, steady breathing just outside the thin fabric of my tent, and I can't do it. I used to think being alone in nature would be peaceful. Now I understand something different. Out there, miles from anyone, surrounded by nothing but trees, you aren't just alone. You're vulnerable. You have no walls, no doors, no locks. And if someone decides to come close to you in the dark, there's nothing between you and them but a thin sheet of nylon and silence.